For years, my family saw my 8-figure business as a cute little hobby. They smiled at my achievements and dismissed them in the same breath. But they made a fatal mistake when they kicked me out of my own sister's wedding. They forgot that in this city, my little hobby owned everything, including every last detail of her special day. If you believe respect is something you command, not beg for, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss how this ends. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday. I was seconds away from signing a $7 million hotel acquisition. The culmination of 6 months of brutal negotiations. The scent of fresh coffee and old leather filled my executive conference room, a combination I'd come to associate with victory. My pen, a heavy Mont Blanc, my father had once called a bit much for a girl, was poised over the signature line. David. Are the final numbers triple-checked? I asked. My voice calm and even. My chief legal counsel, David, a man whose silver hair matched his unflappable demeanor, nodded. They are. Allison. Good to go. Let's close this before lunch. That was when my assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, a rare edge of uncertainty in her tone. Ms. Marie, I'm sorry to interrupt. There's a call from Vanessa. She says it's urgent. Regarding your sister's wedding. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. Urgent was not a word you wanted to hear from a wedding planner 20 days before the event. I nodded at David, holding up a single finger. Patch her through. Sarah. The polished professionalism on the other end of the line was gone. Vanessa's voice was strained. Hesitant. Allison, I'm so sorry to be calling you like this. Vanessa. What's wrong? Is Chloe okay? Is it the venue? My mind raced through a dozen logistical catastrophes. No. Everyone is fine, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. It's Allison. I don't know how to say this, but your family has requested that you be removed from the guest list. The silence that followed was so absolute I could hear the hum of the city 30 floors below. The $7 million contract lay forgotten on the mahogany table. My pen felt impossibly heavy. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his gaze fixed on a point on the far wall, giving me the illusion of privacy. Removed. It wasn't a word like uninvited. It was a clinical, corporate word. The kind of word you use when you're deleting a line item from a budget. It stung more than I could have possibly imagined, especially because that budget, the one paying for the flowers, the food, and the fairy tale venue. I was funded by a $60,000 wire transfer I had made 2 months ago. A transfer I had explicitly requested remain anonymous. The memory of a family dinner from a few months back surfaced, unbidden and bitter. I had just closed a deal to expand my company, the Marie Group, into our 4th state. I was explaining the projected revenue growth when my father cleared his throat, a sound he always used to command the room. That's nice, sweetie, he'd said, patting my hand with a dismissive air. 8 figures is nice. But it's not a legacy. It's a hobby. He then turned to my sister Chloe's fiancé, Tyler, and started asking about his promotion at the bank. My mother just smiled that tight, placating smile of hers and whispered, "He's just from a different generation. Dear, don't mind him." But I did mind. I'd minded for years. I'd minded through every condescending remark. Every time they introduced me as someone who plays at event planning while introducing Chloe as the one who sensibly got her master's in art history. My empire, built from nothing, was always just my cute little project. The decision to fund the wedding had come from a place of love, not strategy. I'd overheard Chloe on the phone with my mom one night, her voice thick with tears as she talked about cutting the guest list, about forgoing the photographer she loved, about how her dream wedding was turning into a nightmare of compromises. My heart had ached for her. So the next morning, I made the call. I told Vanessa to spare no expense, to give my sister everything she wanted, and to send all the primary vendor invoices directly to my private financial advisor. My only condition was that my name never be mentioned. I figured if I couldn't earn their respect through my success, maybe I could show my love through my support. It seemed that was just another business deal where I'd miscalculated the other party's integrity. Back in the conference room, the initial shock began to recede, replaced by something cold and sharp. The hurt was still there, a dull ache behind my ribs, but it was being overshadowed by a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I'd spent so long trying to speak their language, the language of family dinners and quiet support. I finally realized they only understood the language of power. I took a slow, deep breath, my knuckles white around my pen. "Vanessa," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I understand. Could you do me a favor? Please email me an itemized breakdown of how that $60,000 was allocated. I'll need it for my records." "Of course, Allison." Right away. She sounded relieved to have a concrete task. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the table. David finally met my eyes, his expression a mixture of concern and outrage. "Allison, it's fine." "David," I said, picking up the Mont Blanc, "let's close this deal." But after the contracts were signed and the handshakes were done, I didn't feel the usual rush of victory. It just felt empty. I went back to my office, the one with the panoramic view of the city I had supposedly conquered, and stared out the window. The email from Vanessa arrived a few minutes later. A neat PDF listing every vendor for the wedding. An idea, completely unrelated, popped into my head. Another event, a corporate charity gala, had just lost its catering company. I needed a high-end replacement. Fast. On a whim, I opened the internal database for the Marie Group, a comprehensive list of all our assets, partners, and subsidiary companies. It was a long shot, but maybe one of our hotel partners had an available catering arm. I glanced at Vanessa's email again. Westlake Catering. That was the company Chloe had raved about. Just to get it out of my head, I typed Westlake Catering into my company's search bar. I expected 0 results. But one result popped up. Westlake Catering. Status wholly owned subsidiary of the Marie Group. Acquired Q3. Last year. My heart skipped a beat. It had been a small Kiat acquisition, handled by my hospitality division. I hadn't even been on the final calls. It was just a line item on a quarterly report. My fingers felt numb as they moved over the keyboard. I typed in the next name from the list. Florence Floral. Status exclusive partner. Contract held by Pinnacle Holdings. My breath hitched. Pinnacle Holdings was another one of my subsidiaries. A holding company for premier event spaces and their associated vendors. A cold dread, mingled with a terrifying sense of power, began to creep up my spine. I typed faster. Taylor Photography. Status contracted asset. The Marie Group. Finally, with trembling hands, I typed in the name of the venue itself, the place where my family was going to celebrate. Without me. Willow Creek Manor. Status owned and operated by Pinnacle Holdings, a subsidiary of the Marie Group. I leaned back in my leather chair, the city lights blurring in my vision. They hadn't just disinvited me from a wedding I'd paid for, they were planning to throw a party in my own house. And they had absolutely no idea. For a long moment, I just sat there, the screen of my monitor casting a pale blue light on my face. It wasn't triumph, I felt. Not yet. It was a dizzying, terrifying vertigo. The feeling of the ground shifting beneath my feet. I had built an empire brick by brick, deal by deal, all while feeling like a guest in my own family's world. Now I realized they were the guests in mine. The anger, the deep, soul-crushing hurt from Vanessa's phone call began to transmute. It cooled, hardened, and sharpened itself into a single, gleaming point of purpose. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. Sarah, please ask Laura and David to meet me in the executive conference room in 5 minutes. Tell them it's a time-sensitive legal matter. Of course, Ms. Marie. I walked into the room where, not an hour ago, I had been celebrating a multi-million-dollar acquisition. Now, it felt like a war room. When my legal team arrived, they saw the shift in my demeanor immediately. The celebratory warmth was gone, replaced by an arctic calm. I didn't ask them to sit. I simply gestured to the large screen at the end of the room. I have a situation. I began, my voice devoid of emotion. I laid it all out, the $60,000 contribution, the disinvitation, and my subsequent discovery. I projected the list of vendors from Vanessa's email onto the screen, next to the search results from my own company database. David adjusted his glasses, leaning in to read the text. Laura, ever the strategist, just watched my face. So, every single vendor, including the venue and, as of last week, the planner herself, falls under the umbrella of the Marie Group. I concluded. The wedding is in 20 days. David let out a low whistle. He walked over to the screen, tapping the glass. Let me see the standard vendor contracts Pinnacle uses. I pulled them up. His eyes scanned the document, then stopped. He read a clause, then read it again. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. Well, Allison, he said, turning back to me. It seems your family has a spectacular sense of timing. Clause 7b. Services may be terminated by either party without penalty or prejudice, provided that notice is given no less than 21 days prior to the scheduled event date. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. As you said, the wedding is in 20 days. It falls outside the window. They have no legal recourse. If we pull the plug now, they won't find replacements of this caliber in time. It's checkmate. It was Laura who spoke next, her voice cautious. There's more, she said, looking at her tablet. I was reviewing the acquisition file for Velvet Knot Weddings this morning. Vanessa's company. Your mother was the one who personally called Vanessa to have you removed from the list. It's in the client communication logs. She cited wanting to avoid any potential drama and ensuring Chloe had a perfect, stress-free day. Oh man. The phrase felt like a physical slap. The years I'd spent being the peacekeeper, biting my tongue at my father's dismissive remarks, celebrating Chloe's minor achievements, as if they were major victories, all of it was drama. My very presence was drama. Laura looked up from her tablet, her expression serious. Allison, you have every legal right to do this, but you need to think about the optics. They will paint you as the villain, a bitter, jealous sister who ruined a wedding out of spite. The press could have a field day with it. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the city sprawling below me. My city. I thought of my father's words, a hobby. I thought of my mother's tight, disappointed smiles. I thought of the $60,000 I gave freely. An act of love they were preparing to spit on. They made me the villain a long time ago. Laura, I said softly. My reflection, a faint ghost against the skyline. The only difference is now, I have the power to write my own script. I turned back to them. My decision made. The last flicker of doubt had been extinguished. Send the termination notices. I said, my voice as cold and hard as the glass in front of me. All of them. Effective immediately. Coordinate it through Vanessa. She works for me now. Have her inform the client that due to unforeseen logistical and contractual issues, all services have been withdrawn. No further explanation. That evening, I went home to my penthouse. A sterile, silent space that suddenly felt less like an achievement and more like a gilded cage. I poured myself a glass of wine I couldn't taste and watched the city lights ignite one by one. And then, the storm broke. My phone, which had been silent all afternoon, began to vibrate incessantly on the marble countertop. I didn't answer. The calls went to voicemail. First, my father. His voice, usually so controlled and condescending, was a raw, guttural roar. Alice and Mary. You call me back this instant, I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing. But I swear I will sue you for everything you have. This is criminal interference. You've humiliated this family. Next. My mother. Her tone was worse. A syrupy blend of fake concern and sharp-edged guilt. Allison. Honey. I don't understand. Vanessa just called. She was in tears. There must be some mistake. You can't do this to your sister. You can't ruin her special day like this. After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us. I calmly took a sip of wine, the screen of my phone lighting up again and again. I saved both voicemails. Then came the texts. A barrage of them. Each one a little dagger, but the one that truly twisted the knife came from Chloe. It wasn't a call or an angry text. It was a cryptic, public post on her Instagram story. A picture of a sunset with white text overlaid. It's sad when selfish people are so miserable they have to destroy others' happiness to feel powerful. I stared at the screen. At the passive-aggressive dig from the little sister whose dream wedding I had funded. The sister I had protected, advised, and always supported. That was it. That was the moment the last of my familial sentiment died. I calmly took a screenshot of the story. I then went to my laptop and opened a secure file. I dragged the audio files of the voicemails in. I dragged the screenshot in. Then I dug deeper. I found old emails from my dad, forwarding articles about my male cousin's promotions at their law firms with the subject line, Real Success. Sent just days after I'd been featured in a business magazine. I found texts from my mother, gently suggesting I tone down my ambition so I wouldn't intimidate potential husbands. Evidence. Not for a courtroom, but for myself. A reminder of why I was doing this. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. I didn't feel angry or hurt anymore. I felt nothing. Just a profound, surgical clarity. I went to the office early and headed not to my personal office, but to the main boardroom. I told my assistant to cancel all my morning appointments and to prepare the 80K resolution projector. I sat at the head of the massive, empty table and began to build a presentation. I loaded the bank statement showing the $60,000 transfer. I loaded the email from Vanessa confirming my removal from the guest list. I loaded the screenshots of Chloe's story and my mother's texts, the audio files of my father's threats. And for the grand finale, I pulled up something a cousin had added me to months ago. Something I'd never bothered to look at the private family group chat for the wedding planning. I started scrolling. It was all there. In black and white. My phone rang. It was Sarah from the front desk. "Miss Marie," she said, her voice laced with tension. "Your parents and your sister are in the lobby. They say they need to see you. They don't have an appointment." I looked at the presentation queued up on the massive screen, a litany of their greed and disrespect. I looked at the empty chairs lining the table. A slow, cold smile touched my lips for the first time in 24 hours. Send them up. The wait was not long. The soft chime of the elevator arriving at my floor was the only sound in the cavernous room. When the polished steel doors slid open, my family stepped out. They looked like they were marching into a battle they were certain they would win. My father was in the lead, his face a thundercloud of righteous fury. My mother was beside him, her expression a carefully constructed mask of worried disappointment. And behind them was Chloe, her eyes red-rimmed, looking less angry and more utterly bewildered. They stopped short when they saw the scene. This wasn't my office. This was the main boardroom, a place of immense power, designed to intimidate foreign investors and hostile takeover artists. The 30-foot-long mahogany table reflected the cold morning light, and I was sitting at its head, a lone figure in a space built for 30. They were on my turf now, and the sudden shift in geography seemed to throw them off balance. My father recovered first. He strode forward, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" he boomed, his voice bouncing off the glass walls. "This isn't some corporate negotiation. Allison, this is your sister's wedding. You're tearing this family apart with this childish tantrum." My mother rushed to his side, placing a placating hand on his arm. "Michael, please," she said, before turning her gaze to me. "Honey, we're all just terribly upset. There's been a dreadful misunderstanding. You have to call those people back. Chloe is devastated." I said nothing. I simply picked up the small remote from the table in front of me and pressed a button. The 80K resolution screen behind me, a screen that took up an entire wall, flickered to life. An email, crisp and clear, filled the space. It was from Vanessa, the wedding planner. The subject line read, "Confirmation of guest list amendment." The body of the email was short and to the point. "Per your request, please consider this email confirmation that Allison Marie has been formally removed from the guest list for the wedding of Chloe Marie and Tyler Vance." My father stopped mid-rant. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, a small, theatrical gasp escaping her lips. Chloe just stared, her eyes wide. "A misunderstanding?" I asked, my voice quiet but carrying easily in the acoustically perfect room. "It seems quite clear to me." "That was a private family matter," my father sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red. "It had nothing to do with all this. You had no right." I pressed the button again. The email disappeared, replaced by a new image. It was the interface of a group chat, one they all recognized instantly. The name at the top read "Wedding Fun" and then their own words. Their own private thoughts were projected 10 feet high for all to see. "Mom, Vanessa says the floral arrangements Chloe wants will be an extra $5,000. Should I just use Allison's money? She's too wrapped up in her little ventures to ever know the difference." "Dad, go ahead. She owes us that much for being so difficult all these years. It's the least she can do." "Mom, perfect. We'll just say it's a gift from all of us. She'll never question it. The silence in the room was now thick enough to choke on. The air crackled with the raw, ugly truth of their betrayal. I watched their faces. My father looked like he'd been physically struck, his arrogance evaporating into stunned disbelief. My mother went pale, her mask of maternal concern shattering, revealing the cold, calculating woman beneath. But it was Chloe's reaction that I focused on. Her eyes darted from the screen to her parents and back again. The confusion on her face was slowly being replaced by a dawning, sickening horror. She was seeing them, truly seeing them. For the first time, I didn't give them time to recover. I clicked the remote one last time. The group chat vanished, and in its place was the final slide. It was a clean, corporate organizational chart. At the very top, in a large, bold box, were the words, "The Merry Group." Branching down from it were dozens of other boxes: Pinnacle Holdings, Westlake Catering, Crescent Bay Resorts. And at the bottom, a simple, damning summary: 18 premier venues, 5 states, 412 employees. Annual revenue $37 million. This isn't a hobby, Dad, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. This is an empire, and you tried to have a party in my castle after kicking me out of it. Just then, as if on cue, the boardroom doors opened, and my lawyers, Laura and David, walked in. They were impeccably dressed, their faces impassive. They carried identical leather-bound portfolios. The sight of them, of my professional team, seemed to be the final blow that broke my father's composure. He sank into one of the chairs, looking suddenly old and defeated. Laura stepped forward. "Mr. and Mrs. Marie," she said, her tone professional and cool. "My client, Ms. Marie, is aware of the distress the cancellation of services has caused. She is not an unreasonable woman. Therefore, she is prepared to offer an alternative." David opened his portfolio and placed a single sheet of paper on the table. "Ms. Marie is willing to allow the wedding to proceed at one of her other properties, the Laurel Estate. All original vendor services will be replicated. At no additional cost. The event will proceed as planned. On the original date." My mother looked up, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Oh, thank God. Allison. Honey, I knew you wouldn't." "On one condition," Laura interrupted smoothly, her gaze fixed on my mother, "that the event is contingent upon a new set of terms, to be dictated solely by Miss Marie." It was in that moment that Chloe finally found her voice. She had been watching me, not as her sister, but as the woman in charge of this room, the woman whose team moved with practiced efficiency, the woman who held all the cards. She was seeing the CEO, the founder, the person my family had refused to acknowledge for her entire adult life. She turned to our parents, her face streaked with fresh tears, but her voice was surprisingly strong. "You lied to me," she whispered, the words raw with pain. "Both of you. You used her. And you lied to my face about it." She then looked at me, a silent, pleading question in her eyes. Finally, she squared her shoulders and looked back at our parents. "Get out," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Both of you. Just get out. I need to talk to my sister. Alone." My father started to protest, but one look at Chloe's face, and then at mine, made him stop, defeated. He and my mother rose and walked out of the boardroom, leaving a trail of shattered lies in their wake. The doors clicked shut, and the silence that descended was different. It was heavy with unspoken words. With years of a relationship built on a faulty foundation, Chloe finally broke it, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know. Allie," she sobbed, using a childhood nickname I hadn't heard in a decade. "I swear. I didn't know any of it. They told me you were just being difficult. That you didn't approve of Tyler." I walked over and handed her a tissue from a box on the credenza. My anger had cooled, leaving a hollow ache in its place. "I know," I said. And I did. Chloe had always been swept along by our parents' narrative. "Is it all true?" she asked, gesturing vaguely at the now blank screen. "All of this, is it really yours?" "Yes," I said. I looked around the room, at the symbols of a success they had never cared to understand. "Do you want to see it?" I asked. An idea forming in my mind. "Do you want to see what I've actually been building all these years?" She nodded, wiping her eyes. An hour later, we were standing on the private balcony of the penthouse suite at the Crescent Bay Resort, my flagship property. The resort was carved into a cliffside, a marvel of architecture and ambition, with the Pacific Ocean crashing on the rocks 100 feet below. It was a place that commanded 7 figures for a weekend buyout. A place that presidents and movie stars came to hide. Chloe stood beside me, speechless, staring at the sheer scale of it all. The manicured grounds, the infinity pools that seemed to bleed into the horizon, the quiet efficiency of the staff who nodded at me with a deference she had never witnessed before. She was finally seeing my world, not through the distorted lens of our parents' jealousy, but with her own eyes. And I knew, before this day was over, the rules of our family would be rewritten forever. I turned to her, the sea breeze catching my hair. "Tomorrow," I said, my voice steady and clear against the roar of the ocean. "Tomorrow, we'll have a family meeting. Here. And this time, we will be playing by my rules." The next morning, the sun rose over the Pacific, painting the sky in hues of soft gold and rose. I had arranged for the meeting to be held not in a sterile boardroom, but in the resort's private library, a space with floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the ocean on one side and shelves of leather-bound books on the other. It was a place of quiet, unshakable authority. I was there first, sipping a cup of black coffee, feeling the calm that comes after the eye of the storm has passed. Chloe arrived next, looking like she hadn't slept, but her eyes were clear. She gave me a small, tentative smile and sat beside me, simply watching the waves. We didn't need to speak. A few minutes later, my parents arrived. My father had brought backup. A man in an expensive but ill-fitting suit stood beside him, clutching a briefcase. "Mr. Abernathy, their family lawyer since I was a child." It was a transparent, almost pathetic attempt to regain control, to turn this family reckoning into a business negotiation. My father, bolstered by his legal counsel, adopted a tone of magnanimous reason. "Allison," he began, settling into a chair across from us. "We've all had time to reflect. There have been mistakes made, on all sides." "Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat. "What your father is proposing is a reasonable compromise. You will reinstate the original vendors and the Willow Creek Manor venue. In return, you will receive a formal, proper invitation to the wedding. and we can all agree to put this unfortunate incident behind us." I almost laughed. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it was breathtaking. After everything they had seen, everything they now knew, they still believed they were in a position to offer me terms. They still didn't get it. I leaned forward, placing my coffee cup down with a soft click that seemed to echo in the room. "A compromise." "Dad," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "A compromise suggests that we have equal standing. It suggests both parties have something of value to offer the other." I let the words hang in the air for a moment. "Let me be perfectly clear. We are not equals." I slid a single, discreetly bound report across the table. It was our company's audited financials from the previous fiscal year. The Marie Group's gross revenue last year was $83 million. I looked my father directly in the eye. "That's approximately 7 times what your company ever made in its best year. Before you sold it off? I'm not saying this to gloat. I'm saying it so that you understand the scale of your ignorance." I continued, my voice steady. "6 months ago, the Wall Street Journal did a profile on me. You might have seen it, though I doubt you read it. In the initial draft, the reporter mentioned my family background. Your old company. I had my PR team kill that section. I told them I didn't want to embarrass you. I told them I wanted to protect your pride." I leaned back in my chair. "I have spent years building this empire while simultaneously trying to make myself smaller for your benefit. I don't need your permission to be successful. I have never needed it. But if you want to be in my life, I need your respect to be family. Those are my terms. There is no negotiation." The room was utterly silent, save for the distant sound of the ocean. Mr. Abernathy shuffled his papers, suddenly looking like a man who had brought a knife to a gunfight. My father just stared at the report, his face ashen. The numbers. The undeniable, staggering truth of them had finally broken through a lifetime of willful denial. It was Chloe who shattered the standoff. She stood up, her movement decisive. She walked around the table and came to stand beside my chair, facing our parents. "I want to see everything," she said, her voice clear and strong. She looked at me. "Allie, will you show me everything you've built?" Then she turned back to our parents. "And I want you," she said, her voice trembling slightly with newfound conviction, "to be my maid of honor. But only if you truly want to be there. Not because you feel you have to, but because you're my sister and you belong there." The sight of his youngest daughter, his perfect, pliable Chloe, so definitively choosing a side, choosing me, was the final blow. My father sagged in his chair, the fight completely gone from him. All the bluster, the anger, the pride, it all just deflated, leaving a tired, defeated old man in its place. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a dawning, painful understanding. "We saw what we wanted to see," he whispered, the words barely audible. "We never really looked at you. Did we?" The wedding day was perfect. It took place at the Laurel Estate, an immaculate property of rolling green lawns and ancient oak trees. It was smaller than Willow Creek, more intimate, more elegant. It was a place that whispered wealth, rather than shouting it. My parents arrived looking tentative, almost deferential. They spoke in hushed tones, their usual boisterous confidence replaced by a quiet respect. I stood beside Chloe at the altar, her hand gripping mine tightly. When the time came for the reception toasts, I was last. I raised my glass, the crystal catching the late afternoon sun. I looked out at the faces of the guests, finally landing on my family. There's a misconception about building things. I began, my voice clear and steady. People sometimes think big achievements are born from a need to prove something, from a place of spite. But that's not true. You don't build empires out of spite. You build them with vision. You build them with relentless, painstaking work. And then, once you've built it, you get to decide who gets to share the view. I looked at Chloe, and my smile was genuine. To my sister, who has a beautiful view ahead of her, I'm so honored to be sharing it with you today. As I sat down, Chloe threw her arms around me, her eyes shining. You are my inspiration. Allie, she whispered. And in that moment, I felt a weight I didn't even know I was carrying finally lift from my shoulders. It wasn't the victory of revenge. It was the quiet, profound peace of being seen. Months later, the scene was one I never could have imagined. We were having Sunday dinner. But this time it was at my penthouse. The city lights twinkled below us like a carpet of fallen stars. My father was leaning forward, showing me blueprints for a small commercial expansion he was considering, genuinely asking for my opinion on zoning variances and supply chain logistics. My mother was on the phone with a friend, and I overheard her say, with a fierce, unmistakable pride in her voice, "Yes, that was my Allison in Forbes magazine. An incredible mind for business. She gets it from her father's side. Of course, but the ambition is all her own." My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Chloe. "You didn't just fund this wedding. You held it together. I see that now. Thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled. A real, unburdened smile. I looked at my father, who was now eagerly explaining his financing options, and my mother, who was beaming with pride. Our relationship would never be simple, but it was finally real. I had learned that true reconciliation doesn't come from a dramatic act of forgiveness. It comes from the quiet, consistent, daily choice to see a person for exactly who they are, not who you expect them to be. My family had spent a lifetime looking past me. Now, finally, they were learning to look at me. And in doing so, we were all finding our way back to each other.